good morning, or good afternoon, depending on where you are across the world. This is the first in history podcast done by a Bulgarian and somebody in Tasmania. So, Daniel, how are you this morning? How's the weather?
Yeah, I'm good. The weather's cold, but probably not compared to what it gets over there.
What's the time in your time zone?
It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so it's not too bad. But yeah, I don't know if there's ever been a podcast from like the end of Australia. I'm right at the bottom of Australia. If you keep going south, you hit the South Pole, and obviously you're in the middle of Europe, so it's good to talk.
Fantastic. Those of you who are tuning in right now, listening to this episode, this is going to be a special episode because this gentleman that's across me, across the globe actually, but here with me with the microphone is the author of a fantastic book that I'm listening to. And this is recently being awarded the best personal development book by Australian Business Book Awards. He's super knowledgeable, he's full of wisdom, he's working with some fantastic companies and helping them to create more space and find a good balance between creating space and actually keeping pace and getting results. So this is going to be an important episode. Stick with us, but let's just start with the the roots of the story. Daniel, how did you end up in Tasmania? Tell us about your story, about the how did you end up doing what you do today.
Yeah, well, look, I'm from Adelaide originally, which is again a long way from you. It's a much hotter place. And look, we just fell in love with this beautiful place. I ended up buying land, and I actually share land with another couple. I've been living kind of in community for about 10 years, which is another story. But really, I found myself just incredibly busy. I mean, we were talking about our Clifton strengths before, and we're both strategic and we're futuristic. We love starting new things and we're entrepreneurial. And that's always bad in terms of your lifestyle because you just want to get out there and start things. And every idea ends up, becoming something. And then you get busy having all these different things. So I found myself at the time, I was a physiotherapist. Do you call them physiotherapists or physical therapists at the time, working in health? And I ended up in management. I was working and how frustrating it was to work in a system where people were fairly unproductive, that I decided to start training people in how to be productive and how to make space in their busy lives, how to slow down, and how to do things well. And that just became a company eventually. And that's the company I lead now, called Spacemakers. And I haven't turned back. That's been about a decade now of starting different things and new initiatives through that.
Tell me about the book. You've written a book, and it's actually a really, really great book, guys. Anybody who's, let me just see the exact name of the book so you can find it. Um, I
I'll
have it
hold it up
here
for
on,
you. There it is.
there you go, Spacemaker. Okay. For those of you who are listening, Spacemaker, how to unplug, unwind, and think clearly in the digital age by Daniel C. Um, Tell me about the book. What was the reason, the purpose to write the book, and what is the main message that you wanted to convey with this book?
Hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, I was coaching lots of executives at the time, and I'd actually been through a period where I was almost burnt out myself, running too many jobs, having young kids. I was also building a house, and I just found myself just constantly tired. I struggled with breathing. I had this kind of physical problem related to anxiety, simply because I wasn't getting enough sleep, and I just started to realize, wow, there has to be a better way. There has to be more to life than just running frantically and going from thing to thing. And after a number of years, I changed my habits and started to experience a much better way of living and working. And then I started to coach other people who, who I realized were in the same spot I was a few years before. Not that my life was slower, but I just had patterns and rhythms in my life, and I had a different relationship with technology than I had before. And I remember particularly, and I started the book with this story. I met this executive, we'll call her Amy. I won't give her name away, but she was a senior executive in a large global company. And she was like the people I spent a lot of time with, probably in her mid 40s, young kid. She would travel a lot, lots of responsibilities. And she just found that she wasn't happy, and that she had this great job, great career, a fantastic family, owned her own house, and yet there was this just dissatisfaction having to run to stand still. She was always busy and always checking her phone, and constantly online, and just felt like she was a slave to her work and a slave to technology. And I remember she told me, we had this beautiful conversation over a coffee, and it was almost like a confession. She said, "I have to tell you something." And I'm like, "Oh, this will be juicy." And she said, but it wasn't. I mean, she just said that her husband had said, "Look, you need to slow down and stop checking your phone and emailing late at night. Can you put down your devices after dinner and just be present with the family?" Because he was concerned about her. She just wasn't happy anymore. She'd lost her kind of, I don't know, mojo. I don't know if you know that term, but and she tried, but she didn't do a good job. And she kept sneaking out, she told me, to the bathroom or to the bedroom to do emails or to finish off PowerPoints, as if she was this naughty school kid. And then her husband came home one night late after, I don't know, a social occasion, and she quickly lied in bed and turned off her laptop and put down her iPad and pretended to be asleep. But her husband knew better, and he put his hand on her device, and it was still warm. And basically she got caught in the act of pretending to not overwork, which is so ridiculous. But for her, it really stood out. And she said to me, "I felt like I was cheating on my family, and I was cheating on myself, because I just didn't know how to slow down and make space in my life." And that's how that is definitely how I felt. And I've noticed that a lot of people feel like that. And so the book is their work. They need technology. They're passionate about helping the world with what they do, but they also need to learn to unplug and unwind and really invest in themselves and in their relationships, and to make space from the online world. And that's what the book is about.
And I love the metaphor that you're using of keeping pace and making space. Can you maybe share with us those concepts, and how can we find the right sort of how to balance out in between these two?
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I mean, it's interesting because I've been doing this work for a decade high level, but there's a different type of busyness nowadays after COVID, since the digital revolution has really taken over our lives. There's this frantic busyness where everything becomes saturated in distraction, and it's creating this need for a different set of skills, which I call keeping pace and making between technology and productivity. Uh, you know, the culture. Imagine a graph where you have productivity on one side, and then you have technology use on the other side. And culture says that it's like linear. So the more technology you have, the more productive you'll be, and it just goes on and on. Until you become Bill Gates, or I don't know. But that's really not true. And intrinsically, we know that to be true. In reality, the relationship between technology and productivity is this upside down U curve. Okay. And so you need technology to be productive. We are talking right now from the other side of the world in real time. It's incredible. I mean, the digital age is wondrous, and you and I both have careers that would never have been possible without this incredible explosion of technology around the world. So you need to get really tech savvy, and I call them the skills of making pace or keeping pace. And a lot of what I do in my role is to teach people how to use email and to-do lists online, and to manage technology in a way that makes them truly productive. But eventually, if you keep using more technology, you reach this plateau where you use technology more, but you don't get more productivity gains. And then, and this is really important, you end up in this place where more technology actually causes you to slide down the productivity curve. And you're reaching for your phone first thing in the morning and last thing at night. I don't know, you're sneaking the phone on the toilet. You just can't switch off. And I mean, instead of sitting, lying in bed talking to the person you used to make love with, you're now talking to your phone and looking at Instagram. Do you know what I mean? There's this sense where the internet takes over everything, and work becomes your whole life. And if you hit that, you'll be very unproductive, and you'll be unhappy, and you'll lose your health, and it'll damage your relationships. So we call that digital overuse. And this is it's not a completely new problem, but it's the saturation of technology is a new problem. And the thing that caused us to become productive actually causes us to be unproductive. And therefore, we need what I call the habit in a repetitive, habitual way, how to unwind and learn how to rest deeply, how to think clearly and strategically, how to build relationships without a screen, uh, in order to return to that productive middle so that you can really live a healthy life. And I think it's really important to learn the skills of making pace and making space all at the same time, because that's the only way to really thrive in the digital age.
I love the story that you shared in the book about the command Z. So maybe if you can share that, because I think it's a good also example of how much we habitually get used to technology. So if you can share this story, I think it will be great.
Yeah, look, I mean, this is just early on when I was drafting the very early version of the book. It took me 7 years, by the time I published it from when I started. And I remember early on, I was hanging a painting, and I have a two-story house, so I had this huge ladder, and I was trying to put this painting. And the problem is, I didn't have anyone there to tell me if it was straight, so I thought it was straight, and then I climbed down the ladder and went back kind of 3-4 meters, and I'm just like, oh, it's not, it's a bit to the left. So I climbed the ladder and did it again, and it was a bit to the right. Eventually, I got it just about right, and I thought, I'll make one last adjustment, and I climbed up and just moved it a bit, and the whole painting just went doop, and it tipped completely like 45 degrees the wrong way, just because of the nature of how paintings hang sometimes. And I remember my fingers twitched, control Z. And I imagine just thinking, okay, I'll just control Z, which, if you're not an IT person, control Z is a keyboard shortcut to undo a mistake that you've done on, let's say, Microsoft Word or WordPress. And obviously the real world doesn't work that way. And I had to physically fix up the painting myself. But it was the first time I thought, wow, my brain is starting to confuse real life with digital life. And since then, I've seen lots of situations where my brain starts to think digitally. I even see it in the language my children use. I mean, they talk about pausing. So please pause what you're saying. I'm like, when I was a child, we never said pause the conversation. I mean, that's a digital term. I remember my kids, this is hilarious actually. My kids, when they were young, couldn't work out how to get the toast in the toaster. And my son said, "Is it landscape or portrait?" And I'm like, "That's hilarious. You don't know how to put toast in a toaster, but you know the difference between landscape and portrait." So this is this sense of digital saturation. And I mean, I'm not saying it's bad. It's just interesting how much the neuroplasticity of our brain is shaped by our internet practice, and that's probably the bigger conversation. Do you
And
have those
this,
experiences where you
this,
get control Z moments? Do you
oh,
get that type of
absolutely,
thing?
man. Absolutely. That's the reason I really related to this story, that sometimes, well, be the control Z, or as you said, like I need to pause so I can reflect. It's like, no, life goes on. This is not a video on TikTok or Instagram, right? You can pause it. So, but we do get used to that. And I was also curious because you mentioned in the book that you are coming from this background that you kind of understand, the medical science of it, and you are a researcher yourself. So I was really curious to dig deeper into neuroplasticity, and how much does this kind of interaction with technology affects us. And
Mm,
correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard something around, we spend on average around 11 hours in front of a screen, if I'm not confused. Correct me if I'm wrong, but how much does that affect us, and what can we do to kind of remain sane in a digital world?
Yeah, it's really important actually, and because the brain is changing. Essentially, the brain is changing the more we use the internet. And an example I give in the book is when I was young. Again, I was a child. I was a pain. I have to apologize for my parents at the end of this podcast, but they paid for piano lessons, and they said you have to do 15 to 20 minutes of piano practice every day. And it was like torture, 15 minutes of practice. It's so hard. But eventually, with practicing over years, I could pull out, I don't know, a piece of sheet music from Chopin or Mozart, and I could play it. And then eventually, the more I played it, I wouldn't need the sheet music. It was just, I don't know, it was automatic that the symphony was in me. Does that make sense? Because my brain had developed, the neurons in my brain grew and shifted because of this constant, 15 minutes, probably every few days, if I'm really honest, of piano practice. And over years, the music parts of my brain grew and other parts, shrunk. And that's how neuroplasticity works. Our brain changes in response to our habitual behaviors and what we practice. But what's interesting is when you look at the internet, you're absolutely right. The average American, I think, is now on screens cumulative 12 hours a day. In Australia, we're about 9.4 hours on average. But if you're an office worker or a knowledge worker like you and I, it's more like 12 hours. Okay. And so think about it this way. That's 12 hours of internet practice we're doing every day. Uh, can you imagine doing 12 hours of piano practice and how that would change your thinking, your perception of the world, the way you just saw life, and obviously the skills that would come out of you? You wouldn't be doing Control C, you'd be just moving your fingers all the time, playing different symphonies. So there's this sense where we don't think about our internet use as if it's creating a neurological pathway and shaping our brain. And research shows that, for example, in the brains of people who regularly multitask, which is basically using the internet, parts of the brain, the gray matter in the frontal cortex of the brain, which is the part of the brain that creates emotional regulation, that makes you patient, that impacts your mood, and that allows you to tell the difference between important and non-important information, that actually shrinks if you spend too much time on the internet, which is why we're impatient, which is why we pick up a physical book like I've written, and by the time you get to page 10, even though it's well written, you think, oh, okay, I'd really need to check Instagram because I'm bored. You just don't have the patience anymore. You can't you can't stand in a line at the supermarket and just not reach for your phone, or just enjoy your own thoughts, because the brain has changed. And when our brain changes, we lose the ability to perceive how much our thinking is different than it used to be. So that's the negative aspect of neuroplasticity and internet practice. But my passion is to help people to broaden the neurological scorecard, which what I mean by that is every hour you spend scrolling Instagram or watching Netflix is an hour you're practicing that particular way of developing your brain, but it also subtracts from something else, like playing board games with your children, or having a face-to-face conversation, or reading a book, or practicing an instrument, or just sitting with your thoughts and reflecting on the meaning of your life and the data in your day. And so what I'm passionate about is helping people to intentionally unplug and make space so that they enjoy the best of the online world. That's that productivity curve, making pace. But so they also really broaden the things that make us truly healthy and happy, because the research basically says that being offline makes us happy and being online makes us unhappy if we fall into that digital overuse part of the curve. And life is too wonderful and too rich to spend it all online. And so we can untrain our brains to be addicted and train our brains to enjoy other pursuits once more.
And I would be super happy to dig into some practical ideas and habits in just a moment, but just wanted to reflect on what you said. And I'm sure everybody who's listening can relate to this, even for a very short time. I remember this winter, I got this mission to watch the whole Game of Thrones series, because I previously just watched a couple of seasons, right? And I was like, okay, you know what? It's an exceptional production. Definitely not my kind of vibe. I love fantasy and these things, but it's a very low, dingy kind of depressive mood and vibe and intrigues, and so it's not my kind of thing. That's the reason I didn't watch it before. But you know what? I'm curious. I want to see the details. I used to be a movie maker. I'll watch it, right? So I started watching one episode every second day, right? And man, I gotta tell you, I my brain would focus on negative things. My brain would
Yeah.
lead me to. I felt so much more. I won't say happy, but like my mood would go down just by watching this kind of, everybody's like a bad person looking to stab you in the back, and like it's like, wow, how little is needed for me to be primed into the right or wrong direction, right? How important is our environment, the the movies that we watch, the people we surround ourselves with, the podcast that we listen to, the people we have in our lives. It's just, and as you're saying, if we're spending 11, 12 hours a day in front of something, maybe we want to be a little bit more conscious how we do it and be a little bit more disciplined. Chocolate is not a bad thing, right? But eating 300 grams of chocolate a day, that might not be the best idea, right?
Or eating it 12 hours a day may not be very good for you. That's a great analogy. I mean, I personally gave up on Game of Thrones after the first series because I just like the main character died. I give up, but I felt the same way as you. Actually, I love the expression "what you give attention to grows, and what you ignore dies away," which is actually a spiritual principle. I learned it through my faith, but it's very true with neurology and neuroplasticity. We know that the friends that we spend time with will deeply shape our trajectory on life and our views of the world and how positive or negative we are. If all of our friends are depressed and wear black clothes and are sad all the time, well, we'll feel sad. And similarly, like you said, but the challenge is a lot of our friendships, a lot of our relationships now are actually online, and they're not with real people. They're with avatars or with I don't know, people who have been generated by the shareholders of Silicon Valley for particular reasons. And of course, if you're unhappy and you're discontent, well, then you're going to buy more. So it works from a consumption point of view. I mean, this as a marketer. That's not the only way to market, but certainly negative emotions can help. So I don't know, there is a sense where, be careful with what you put in and it will shape what comes out.
Super interesting what you share in the book. A couple of things that really got me thinking. One was this whole generational change of habits in many ways positively correlated with the first iPhone. That's something that you speak about. And then from there, the way we consume things and the way we use technology is really been changing drastically. And another thing that's related to that, I want you to comment on that, is the fact that many of the executives of the companies creating these technologies are actually really careful and have great boundaries in the way they and their families are using the technology that they give us to use. So can you maybe comment on those things?
Absolutely. So I read this fascinating study. It's a good book. It's a few years old now, but Jean Twenge, she's a United States generational researcher, one of the key researchers from what I gather in the United States. She looked at 4 of the largest studies, which are longitudinal studies, tracking generational trends over many, many years. And she had this fascinating realization that normally generations change slowly over time. So let's say the boomers and Gen X and Gen Y, and maybe now the iGen or Gen Z, whatever you call them. So like the millennials and the Gen X shifted to millennials just very slowly, and eventually enough people said the trends have changed, and so we have a new generation. But then something happened in 2012, like in a ridiculously condensed period of time, where she says that the graphs just went up like a massive cliff or a massive mountain, or went down like a massive cliff. And generational data just transformed overnight, and it had never, ever happened in all the research since the 1930s. And so her and her team tried to work out, well, what happened between 2007 and 2012 to literally create this totally different generation of young people overnight. And it wasn't the global financial crisis. It wasn't migration. They looked at all these different factors. And then basically they discovered that statistically, generational data massively changed the moment the iPhone reached 50% saturation in the US market, which I think was 2012. And since that point in time, everything's changed in young people's generational behavior. They have less sleep. They're much more depressed, much more anxious. They're much more concerned about safety. There's more polarization. They drive cars less early, like all these random things. They don't go to the mall as much. It's not all bad. I'm not saying that the generation is bad, but I'm just saying that technology changed humanity pretty much overnight. And she has this great quote, and I've written it down actually. She says, this is her summary of the research, that teenagers who spend more time on screen activities are more likely to be unhappy. And those who spend more time on non-screen activities are more likely to be happy. There's not a single exception. All screen activities are linked to less happiness, and all non-screen activities are linked to more happiness. I mean, this is a predominant, like an amazing researcher, and that is tremendously important to recognize. I do digital parenting classes, and I say to parents, just the 12 to 16-year-old age group, for particularly girls, and their stats around anxiety and depression are terrible. And we've got to get them off of social media during those formative years. And yet that's the time when, social media kind of totally dominates their worldview. So we need to change the way in which we understand technology. But I mean, that's young people. But what I've seen post-COVID is they're like the canary in the cage. I don't know if you know that expression, but the sense where uh, they're the first group of people to change en masse. And yet what we're seeing in people in my age is we're all changing en masse, because if we practice the internet 12 hours a day and we're using new media, so the swiping technologies and the internet enriched technologies, well, then we're all changing our brains, and therefore some of the challenges we experience and see in young people are happening for all of us, even though we have a reference point to a time before technology and our brains were fully developed before we got totally saturated in this kind of digitally enriched environment. So there are some differences. And the last question, I mean, you mentioned the founders of these technologies, and you're absolutely right. I mean, I remember first hearing that Bill Gates wouldn't let his child have a phone until 14, but he's fairly old. But then Steve Jobs wouldn't give his children an iPad because he said he wanted them to eat around a dinner table without technology and to talk about history. Uh, and then even the newer people like I think Evan Spiegel, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but he's the CEO of Snapchat. He only allowed his stepson 45 minutes of screen time every week, I think. And the CEO of Google, Sundar Pichai, he only he's very strict in his own screen behaviors. And what we're seeing is that the people who create the technologies know how addictive they're creating them. They know that they're using billions of dollars of research to make us totally addicted to make money from us, and they don't give the devices to their own kids. And so I just tell parents, follow the leaders of Silicon Valley and don't go faster than them, because they know what they've created, and anything else is just kind of consumer pressure, and your kids are more valuable than that. And so there's a whole conversation around that for parenting, obviously, but hopefully it's not meant to scare people. I'm not trying to say it's all bad, but we need to unplug and unwind, even as we use these wonderful technologies. I mean, I use social media, obviously, for business. I just try not to spend too much time on it for the rest of my life.
Yeah, coming back to the chocolate metaphor, right?
The
Like,
chocolate.
I mean, it's technology is not bad. It's actually, I mean, we're connected now through technology. It's amazing. However, it requires more discipline, and it is not always easy to have the discipline. And very interesting what you mentioned as well. In maybe we can talk a little bit about that, because I think everybody can relate. I read a study somewhere that 95% of people, the first thing they do in the morning is to check up their phone the first 15 minutes of the day. And in the book, I think somewhere you talk about the fact that teenagers checking their phone, was it 10 times during the night? They kind of wake up and they go and like, talk to me about that. And what could be, let's go more practical now, what could be some ideas and practice and habits around um, improving our well-being in the
Mhm.
bedroom?
Yeah. So, look, I'd also say 95% of statistics are made up. So, we have to take it with a grain of salt. But no, I think your stat that I mentioned was in Australia, 10% of teenagers check their phone 10 times throughout the night. Now, that's still a lot. I mean, that's amazing. And they're so sleep deprived. And if you're sleep deprived, then you have mood disorders and all the other stuff that goes with it. But again, my book isn't written for teenagers. It's written for people like you and I, seriously busy executives and leaders and business owners who also need to reframe how we use technology. And yeah, so practically, I mean, the whole book at the end is about how do you practically unplug once you've changed your paradigm and your thinking of technology, and then reorient it around healthy principles, which is the middle part of the book. Practically, what do we do? How do we make space in this really beautiful way without rejecting technology. And so you've referred to one of the last practices in the book. I have annual, weekly, and daily practices. One of the daily practices is a daily pause, where you have these small pauses throughout each day based on research where you can experience life in a broader way. And one of the simplest ones, like you mentioned, is to start and end the day without a phone. So I practically recommend that people charge all their devices outside of their bedroom. I mean, again, if you have children, you just say, hey, this is a family habit. This isn't about you. We're all going to try to do better, because mum and dad both spend the end of the evening scrolling emails and Instagram and playing games on their phones. And it's not good for us, because we realized we used to talk to each other. We used to actually have conversations in this thing called pillow talk, but now we have a relationship with our screen. And at the end of the day, how good is it to be able to reflect on your day, or just think about what the meaning of the day was, and think your own thoughts. And particularly, I think I loved your Game of Thrones analogy. We wake up, we reach for our phone first thing, it's our alarm clock, and then we listen to what's happening, I don't know, in the Ukraine, or what Donald Trump has said, or do you know what I mean? It's just depressing. And I'm not saying we shouldn't care about world events, but do you really want to start the day with this hyper sensationalized bad news? That immediately shifts your thinking. Or even email. When I wake up and I check my email, I start thinking about work, and I'm like, actually, I don't want to do that. What if I can just think my own thoughts rather than someone else's thoughts? What if I can pray or practice gratitude, or just be in silence, or think about the meetings and the goals and the things I want to see out of my day, so that I enter the day with a plan before all these emails hit me and all this bad news from whatever media outlet you're listening to. So to finish with that daily pause at the start and the end of each day can really change your trajectory at the start and at the end of the day. And obviously it helps with sleep. There's one of a number of daily pauses, and I'd be happy to give a lot more practical advice. But yeah, that's a good
Oh,
example.
that's really good, man. And maybe if we can continue on the topic of sleep. By the way, just wanted to give a shout out to a couple of people who are tuning in live right now, and I can really relate to these people, just like yourself, Daniel, as the kind of soul sisters and brothers in the realm of productivity coaching and consulting. Katie, who actually connected us, Katie Stoddard, great having
Mm.
you here on the podcast, Katie. Great seeing you two productivity masters together. She says. Um, Wonderful, wonderful creature, and really, really somebody I can connect to. Leon van der Loon, I hope I pronounced his name correct, but he's also on the same journey, supporting people, supporting companies to find this space, to find this productivity. He's actually got inspired and bought your book from Audible, so he's gonna have something to additional to get inspired by. But on the topic of this, how does a productivity consultant make sure that he has a quality sleep? Like what do you do to make sure that you're actually at the top of your game, having in mind that you're a family person as well? You have kids, you have all these clients you have to take care of, you're joining podcasts, you're partner in a company. How do you make sure that you protect your sleep?
Mhm. It's a great question. Look, I'm very thankful I do sleep fairly well. Uh, when I don't sleep, that's a really good sign that my life is out of whack and I'm too stressed, and the pressure is on. That's one of me being breathless and me not sleeping well. They're the two signs for me that, yeah, I'm on that kind of, fulcrum where I need to change what I'm doing pretty quick. Otherwise I'll go downhill. But for me, I'm an introvert, and it means a lot to me to be able to think. I think a lot of the time, I mean, two things for me. One is to have thoughts, and the other one's to care for my body. So in terms of my thoughts, I need time to be able to process and think deeply and reflect on my day and reflect on my feelings and the interactions I have, and to think strategically about where my business is heading or where my family is. So it's practices for me. Like I spend half a day on a Monday morning, which is for me. I don't do a lot of work. I walk on the mountain, or I go to the gym and I walk down the path, and I just think. I have a daily journaling habit where I read some scripture. I write down what I'm thankful for, and I pray. It's really important to me. So to have those times when my brain can think means I don't think at nighttime. I don't wake up with those million thoughts in my mind thinking, because people who don't spend enough time thinking in the day invariably end up thinking at night. Does that make sense? And the other thing is physically, I'm a physical therapist, physiotherapist by background, so I very much value physical activity, and the research is obviously tremendous that when you are physically fit, you sleep better. When you sleep better, you've got more energy to be exercising. And so I make sure I head to the gym and exercise every day in some capacity. And if I don't exercise for 2 days in a row, I won't sleep well. So I know my own body, but everyone's different. It's about knowing yourself, and learning that, yeah, rest is important, and sleep is not. I think the mindset's important, actually. Sleep is not something you do because you have to. The older I get, the more I realize, oh, I love sleep. I love the feeling that I have when I've had a good sleep. And my kids are older now, but when they're really young, like, every hour you get is amazing. So I don't know, treasure it and value yourself enough to sleep. We shouldn't see sleep through an economic lens. If I sleep this much, then I put out that much output. How much sleep can I minimize and still get my return on investment? Like, that's a crappy way of looking at sleep or life or productivity. We need to value sleep and rest and humanity for itself, irrespective of its outcome. Yeah, you might have different answers than me. I'd be fascinated to hear your thoughts.
No, look, I think sleep is absolutely, this for me is number one. We have a framework in our book, Perform the Unsexy Truth About Startup Success. We've developed this super simplified framework about energy, and it's an acronym, and it stands for exercise, nutrition, excitement at work and out of work. What's the next one? ENRG. R is relationships,
Yep.
and G goes for good sleep, and Y is you time, or time for yourself.
Yeah, nice.
And these are just, it's super simplified, right? But if you get this right, for me, out of these six, sleep is number one when it comes to my
Mm,
energy, to my well-being. I love what you mentioned. If you don't sleep well, it goes, the consequences. One of the consequences, mood disorders.
mm,
We all know, if you're not well rested, that you're kind of negative, you don't see opportunities, you're just not feeling well, and it becomes like this kind of a cycle. So for me, I wouldn't say I'm 100% sleeping well every day. I have some days that I kind of don't do the right thing. Like, maybe sometimes it's like, oh, I'm so excited about work, so you kind of work a little bit too late, and then that affects your sleep quality.
mm,
And I just want to mention or emphasize on what you just mentioned is, um, it is really about understanding yourself. Like,
mm.
there's millions of books about sleep, about well-being, about productivity. Whatever you read, you got to try it out, you got to test it, and you got to see what works for you. I know people that go to bed 2 or 3 in the morning. They're, just not morning people, and that works for them. I need to go to bed by 10 p.m. and my coulter calls me grandpa. you know 'cause- no, seriously, because that's how I function. If I do it, I
Mm,
wake up 5 or 6 in the morning, I'm full of energy, I do my morning meditations, routines and so on, and I'm in a good place. Some other people would be different. And sometimes it's not about the quantity. Quantities, of course, it matters, but it is the quality of the sleep. Over drinking coffee,
yeah.
not a good idea. Checking your phone and spending the last moments before you try to fall asleep on your phone, not a great idea if you want great sleep quality. So all these kind of seemingly little things are what makes the difference. Like, we,
Yeah.
we all know that, right? There was a book called The Compound Effect, which is, what is the effect of the seemingly small choices, right? If I'm to make one extra phone call to a potential customer, only one, maybe it's not going to affect much my results today or this week. But what if I think about the compounded affect the results that will come if I continue doing this action for a year or 5 years in the future, right?
Mm.
Drinking one extra glass of water instead of soda, eating the apple instead of brownie, right? We always look into the short term kind of, you know what, it's just a brownie, you know.
Yeah. And that's the
And
beautiful thing. You just need small, I mean, my language is you just need small habits which create space. So I think I'd put sleep in the space making habits, but these small habits where you just, it doesn't take up all of your time, but you compound them. It's a great analogy. And it explains the whole principle. It explains my whole philosophy that we've got to start by putting in the right things into our life, make them habitual, start really small and simple. Let one gain build on the next, and then your work will find its way around it, and you'll be happier and healthier and more productive. We think very similarly, which is great.
and another topic that I think we were discussing it before we started the podcast, but I think it's important to emphasize on is the um there's so much choices, demands, distractions, ideas, devices that are trying to get our attention. And in this kind of world, digital age world of distractions, how do we find our focus? And we talk about the big picture focus. And maybe if you can give us some practical ideas on how do you consult your clients to really set their long-term focus
Hmm.
priorities, and then how do we build it backwards into our day to day so we make sure that we actually create space for the things that matter most?
Yeah, no, it was a great question. And for me, I think it's just, I mean, I've got a very simple view of the world that you need to think in order to know where you're heading in life. You need to think in order to know your strategies, in order to unblock, problems before they come. You like we're knowledge workers, right? And most of us are. And if that's the case, we need to think. And yet, a knowledge worker normally they start their day by finding out what's on the news. They check their email and they just go from one thing to the next, and then they wonder why they're always busy and never achieve the right things, why they lose their why, and they don't know where they're really heading, either in a year or for the rest of their life. And so I just say you have to start by carving out space in a habitual way to think. And so a lot of the last part of my book is actually teaching people how to think deeply. So there are really big things. So for me, I have a quarterly retreat. So summer, autumn, winter, spring, I have a day off where it's not a day off, but it's a day where I'm not working, achieving things. I just walk along the beach. I have coffee. I just let my brain go where it goes. I think about what happened in the last quarter. I think about where I'm heading in the next quarter. It's paid work. It's real work because I'm paid to think. And some of the best decisions I've made in life have come from just taking that quarterly retreat to reflect on where I'm going and where I'm heading. It's not structured. I just don't let myself do emails that day, and I write things in my journal, and then I transfer them to my to-do list if I have these aha moments at the end of it. So that's one pattern. On a daily basis, or a weekly basis, I have simple habits like going to the gym and not listening to podcasts and not listening to audiobooks. So I love podcasts. I love getting that input. But I think to become wise, you need to not just get more information, you need the space to reflect on that information, to work out how it relates to your own life and your context, and to maybe assess the emotional intelligence of it as well. So how it might play out in relationships. And that can only happen if you somehow process that information and have the space to think. And so, I mean, I know I'm an introvert, I think in a particular way, but I think we all need to be able to not just fill our minds with music and podcasts. We need to fill our minds with those things. So I do it a few times a week. I listen to podcasts, and then a few times a week, I exercise or walk without podcasts, because I force myself to reflect on what I'm thinking about. When I swim, I used to count, my laps, and then I realized actually I always swim about the same speed. I'm not competing with anyone, so I'll just swim for 20 minutes and I'll count time and let my brain think. I love thinking in the shower, and then at the end of it, to-dos come out of my time just thinking in the shower. So whatever works for you. Not probably too personal. I overshared. Anyway, the point is, create thinking times as a rhythm. And you don't have to dedicate more time. I love connecting it with exercise. Stephen Covey says, basically combine things like building relationships with strategic thinking, or building exercise with thinking. So if you're an extrovert, then find time to have a coffee with someone, you get to connect with them, and then brainstorm the heck out of something so you get to do your thinking. My point is, you won't know where you're heading in life. You won't know your greater why. You won't really know who you are and what your life script is, as opposed to the culture script or your family script that they just hand down to you. You won't know that unless you do the inner work. And the inner work only happens in silence and solitude. It happens when you're uncomfortable enough to think your own thoughts and to process your emotions, and maybe have a counselor when you need it, and maybe have a coach when you need it, and to do the work that helps you know your why, to know your goals, and to know where you're heading in life. I just don't think there's no shortcut. It's like exercise. There's no shortcut to eating well and getting physically active if you want to be fit. If you want to know who you are and where you're heading in life, there is no shortcut. You have to think and allow your inner life to be part of your journey. Yeah.
Man, I love how beautifully you explained that. And just reflecting on this, it's the same thing in business, right? I don't know about you, but many times when I get hired by companies and teams to help them to find their focus and to give them the strategies, the ideas of how to be more productive, it is really not about me coming up with, here is the tool that nobody knew before. Everything is available. It's about inspiring them to look deeper and to maybe make some small changes and tweaks of the way they do things, and really finding space. You said the thinking times as a rhythm. I love how beautifully that sounds, but that's the point, right? Like, it's not a one-time thing. You go to a 3-day retreat and you're done for the year. No, that's not how it works. It's kind of like taking a shower, right? Like, I can take a shower for 3 hours, right? But then in a week, if I don't take any more showers. But it's the same with reflection and planning and seeing things, right? It's um you have to do it on a consistent basis. If you don't create this space, uh and you have to know yourself, as you said, I need this. I'm thinking with a pen with in my hand.
Yeah, exactly.
It's hard for me to think without something to write. Like, it's really I'm feeling
Yeah.
disabled, right? Like,
Yeah,
not-
people make fun of me all the time because I love whiteboards, and I have whiteboards around my house. I'll have people over for dinner, and I'll suddenly want to share something, so I'll pull out a whiteboard, and my wife's like, "You can't bring out a whiteboard at dinner." I'm like, "But I like to draw," and everyone's like, "Ah, he likes whiteboards. That's fine." But you've got to find your own way of thinking. But the point is, you have to think, and you need that work. So yeah.
yeah, you have to reflect. You have to, are we going in the right direction? Personally, professionally, whatever context you choose. But where am I going? What have I achieved? On the one side, the achievement side, right? On the other side, how did I feel?
Yeah.
Am I aligned with the things that I do, like the both sides of the story? And do we have to make any changes? Is there something that immediately can be done for me to improve my quality of life, my quality of business, or the people around me? We were talking about you referred to David Allen and the episode that I did with him with the video snippet, and how it kind of, maybe you can share that instead of being like the importance of the.
I just liked how he was saying that, what is productivity? It's not getting more done. It's more not being more efficient. It's making sure that you're producing the results you want. I mean, he says it's to get the right things done. I quite like that productivity is getting the right things done with the right intention, because you can even get the right things done with the wrong heart or the wrong attitude, and it's not quite the same. But it's implied either way. But the interesting thing, we've been talking about, how do you think about where you're heading, what your life plan is, what your life goals are. And we were having a conversation even before we started this live interview that actually it changes. I mean, I'm in my mid 40s now, and I used to think that I knew on my 80th birthday what my 80-year-old self would say and what was really important. And actually, probably about 2 or 3 years ago, that started to shift. I'm like, actually, what I thought was going to be my 80th legacy is changing, because I've changed and I've grown. I had a very dear friend very close to me die suddenly, and literally die in my arms, and that changed a lot of my perception about life and what I valued and where I want to put my time in the next 5 years. And that's just part of life. So even that idea is you just can't think it all at once. Well, you can't think it all at once, not only because it's impossible, but because we change. And as we get older, I mean, the research says that in our 40s, we typically have this very significant life change, almost as significant as teenagehood. And we make fun of people buying sports cars in their middle life, and chasing younger women, but the reality is that there is this midlife slump between about 45 years old and 52, where across all cultures and all races, uh, people are more unhappy. It's the most unhappy time of life because we're recognizing that the things that we were dreaming of and hoping for haven't really come about. And so kind of our high hopes for the world get crushed. And at the same time, we're squeezed on all sides with kids and mortgages and hard work pressures and sick, parents, and all the kind of pressures that hit us in midlife tend to just accumulate, and you have this just happiness slump. And so during that time, you need even more time to reflect on where you're heading, who you want to be, and what might career look like beyond success, what comes next when you're actually successful and you're actually unhappy in the job that you've created. And so my point is, that's a long way of saying we change over time, and uh, the more you are wondering about where you're heading next, the more time you need to think, and the more you need to invest in that process of discovering yourself and your why and your purpose, and allow yourself to let go of old identities and old stories that used to serve you well, because sometimes we have to let go of them in order to work out where we're going next. And that's a process, and it requires that strategic thinking.
It's so interesting to hear that there's this kind of a age in which there's this happiness slump, but then you also mentioned 50s, 60s, 70s are actually really, um, like, tell me about that.
Yeah, well, there's great
This whole.
news. I mean, I love, there's so many different authors who come at this from different places. I love Second Mountain by David
Mm.
Brooks. It's a really great book. He talks about the difference between that first and second mountain. And again, mid 40s is that cutoff point for most people. Richard Rohr has some stuff from a spiritual perspective. Jonathan Rourke does it from a scientific perspective. And he literally has this happiness arc. He calls it the happiness curve. I think that's the name of the book. And he shows that actually people are happy in their 30s and 20s, but it's this vibrant, hopeful, energetic happiness. Then you hit this slump in your like mid to late 40s and early 50s. But then what happens is at the time when you least expect it, when you feel like life is only going to go downhill from here, and you think, when I get 80, I'm just going to be unhappy because my bones will start aching and everything will break down. Well, actually, the opposite happens, and we become increasingly happier in our late 50s, happier in our 60s, even happier in our 70s. And then there's only a slight dip in our 80s, but we're still happier in our 80s statistically across culture and across population trends than we are in our 60s. So basically, I'm really looking forward to the next 30 years, because if I follow the trajectory that most people follow, again, it doesn't work for individuals, but it works for large population trends, the next 30 years are going to be my happiest in my life. And it's irrespective of whether or not you're sick. Somehow, what happens is our brain physically changes on an MRI scan, where the parts of life that are positive start to become absorbed more readily. It's easier to see the positive in life, and you start to worry less about the negatives. You care less about what other people think about you, and somehow your need for success in the way that you're driven when you're 20 and 30 just becomes less meaningful, and so you can enjoy simple things more. And I think it's evolution's way of preparing us for being grandparents, where we care for the next generation rather than having to achieve it all ourselves. So there's a very real reason why we change our brains. But that's encouraging. If you're feeling sad, dissatisfied in your mid 40s, like you can't work out why you're feeling sad because life isn't that bad, and you don't want to talk about it, well, find others who feel like you, because almost all of us do. Normalize it. Be encouraged that the next 30 years are going to be better than where you're at now statistically, and care for yourself and do the thinking to work out who you are in your inner self, in order to get past that midlife slump and experience the joy of older age. Hopefully that's encouraging for people.
It's definitely very hopeful, and for you, Daniel, now in your mid 40s, you just have to hold on, brother.
I know.
Just,
It's all uphill
several
from
years,
I know. Jonathan Rourke, I love his last thing. He talks about all the things that we can do to get us through the happiness slump. And he said, from a statistics and research perspective, there is one thing that works better than anything else. Wait it out. That's it. You just have to go through it. And when you hit a particular age, when you least expect it, you start to feel happier. I'm like, okay, let's go for that.
So anybody listening in their mid 40s feeling a little bit misaligned, hey, it's just a period. It's gonna get better, guys. It's gonna get better. Science says it. Lovely, lovely, wonderful. Daniel, before we wrap up this episode, I feel like we can speak for weeks, first of all, without stopping about so many topics. So definitely would love to have you back at some point. But I wanna hear, you haven't mentioned much about it. What is the type of work that you do? Who do you serve? And I'm sure there's many leaders listening right now, maybe excited to work with you in one shape or another. But who do you serve? How do you serve companies, people, and what's next for you on the journey of empowering people to be more productive and have a more meaningful life?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. So I love working with people who are like Amy, the person I mentioned, leaders, executives, managers, business owners, professionals who love what they do. They're capable, they're confident, they care about the work they do, but they're just smashed by work, and they are aware that they are too connected to their devices, and they want to find a better way. So basically, busy people who need space in the clutter of life. That's why we called ourselves Spacemakers. My company is the same name as my book, although I took off the S for some reason just to make it complicated for marketing. It was a dumb mistake. And so I help busy people make space, and so I do that in a number of ways. Clearly, productivity is one of those ways. I train teams. We have a lot of 3 to 4 hour training courses. Email Ninja is about getting your inbox to 0 each day, and I show your team how to do that in 3 to 4 hours online. List Assassin is going through the getting things done stuff simplified to help you capture and organize and review and do and use a to-do list so you can organize all the stuff in your life using a list, a killer to-do list, we say. Priority Samurai is another course, which is about how to shape your priorities around your future self and how to draw that into the future. And I have Making Space training, which is about digital wellness and learning to care for yourself in a hybrid working environment based on my book. So I'd love to train you. I train teams all around the world, in Europe, in America, obviously in Australia. It's done online, or fly me in and I'll have a holiday to Bulgaria, but online simple. I also do Strength Finder coaching and do work with teams, and I write to try to encourage and educate people so they can take care of themselves and make space for what matters most.
You heard the guys. You heard the gentleman, guys. He's willing and excited to support you and your team. So if you really enjoyed what you listened to today, make sure to reach out to Daniel C, co-founder of Spacemakers and author of Spacemaker. So final question, Daniel, just to wrap up this. Imagine you are at the end of your life and all your books, all your courses, everything is gone. It never existed, and you have a chance to only leave one piece of advice for the future generations to have a more productive and happier life. What would be your message that you will leave?
Oh, that's a good question. Look, I don't know the nature of the audience, but I am a person of faith as well. So I just go back to the simple teachings of Jesus: love God, love people. We just have to love, and yeah, which isn't essentially making space for me is about making the time to really love people and to help the world and to contribute to the environment and to do the stuff that matters. So maybe that might be my message. I'll copy someone else. It's probably better than my own message.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And thanks everybody for making it to the end of the episode. Episode 107, meaning there's 106 more super, super meaningful, insightful episodes just like this one. Once again, I want to remind you, get in touch with Daniel if you're excited to boost your own productivity, your meaning, find a better relationship with technology, but also make sure to go and get this book, Spacemaker. It's available pretty much everywhere. Paper version, Kindle, audio version. I love audiobooks. Get the book, get inspired, and of course, it's about execution. It's about application. We can talk about these things forever, but at the end of the day, hopefully, you can get one simple idea from today. Apply it. Make sure to send us a message on LinkedIn or email. Yeah, have an amazing day. See you once again in the next episode of Productivity Mastery.